Resizing brass, long-range hunting, and putting a stainless steel barrel on a blued action. This week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is sponsored by Modular Driven Technologies. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out mdttac.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday our first question comes from Cedric, and Cedric asks, for PRS with a bolt action, I have my perfect load found with full-length resized Lapua brass. But if I want a neck size only with the hope of better performance and more lifetime of brass, now my case volume increased, so my load will be completely different. I know I'll have to full resize probably every 5 reloads anyway, so I don't even know if it's worthy to do a neck size only. Have you really observed an increase in brass lifetime? How do you manage the shift? Is it really important for PRS? Thank you for your help and love the show. Well, Cedric, you have already done the lion's share of the work right now by developing a correct load for your rifle with full-length size brass. Now, I think you may have a concept a little bit misunderstood here in that we do have to be cognizant of our case capacity when we are doing a load workup. So you can't just take, say, Lapua brass, do a load workup with Lapua brass, and then switch to Norma brass with that same charge weight. It may work, it may not work. There may be a difference in case volume there that will cause a difference in pressure and either cause you to drop off the node you found or cause excessive pressure, causing some kind of pressure issues, either blown primers, etc. So when we switch brass, we need to drop down and work back up with that new brass so that we get an appropriate charge weight and we stay within the accuracy node with the new brass. The reason for this is the wall thickness and the case head thickness on different types of brass may be different. Even within the same cartridge, different brands of brass can have different thickness. So that is really why we're concerned with case capacity when we're doing a load workup. Now, the difference in case capacity between full-length size brass and neck size brass is a static situation. So when you resize that piece of brass and then you sit it on the bench, you may measure a difference in case capacity in grains of water. So if you want to actually try this, then you leave a primer in it, you fill the case with water until the water is at a I usually watch and allow a little bit of a convex water tension to form on the mouth and then measure the weight of the water that's in the case, and I'll do that the same on the other case with the same size convex tension, and then compare the two. So if you do that between a full-length size and a neck size case, you may find that there's a difference in case capacity between those. Again, this is the static case capacity with the case outside of the rifle, not under any tension. Now, when we load that case and we actually put it into the rifle and you pull the trigger and the primer ignites and ignites that powder stack in there, instantly you are building pressure inside the case. Now, the pressure has a curve that it builds over, but fairly rapidly that case does what's called obturate. So the case swells to the maximum diameter of the inside of your chamber. The steel walls of the chamber are actually what are containing that pressure. The brass is just kind of acting as a seal to make sure that any gaps in that are sealed up so you don't get gas escaping between the bolt face and the chamber. So instantly, when that case obturates, the chamber is what is limiting the size of the case. Now, again, we have to take wall thickness and case head thickness into account, but if you're using two same types of cases just sized differently, that when the case expands under the pressure of a full powder charge, then your case capacity is going to be the same when it swells out. So you don't really need to worry about case capacity difference between full-length size and neck size. What you need to worry about is you need to worry about your standard deviation between the two, because even though the case pressure and the velocity may be the same, relatively speaking. You may get more consistency out of the neck sizing or the full length sizing. It's going to depend upon your chamber and depend upon your load. So you'll want to shoot those over a chronograph, see what your standard deviation is, and then go with whichever one works best for you. Because first of all, we're looking for accuracy and consistency. Secondly, we're looking for brass longevity, because the brass is the disposable part in this equation. Brass doesn't last forever. Even if you use all the best practices, you're still going to end up losing brass on a course of fire. You're still going to end up throwing out the brass or recycling the brass when it reaches the end of its life. Now, neck sizing should give you the best brass life. However, you will get to a point, depending upon what action you're firing this brass in, where it is difficult to lock that bolt down, and then you'll need to resize by pushing the shoulder back. You don't need to really full length size. Well, you just need to crush that shoulder back enough that it will chamber easily and reliably in the rifle that you've developed the load for. So in that, I say set your full length sizing die so that you're only pushing that fired brass shoulder back a couple of thousandths, and that will allow you to easily chamber that load in the rifle that you've developed the load for. If you switch over and try to fire that load in a different rifle, the bolt may not even close on it, but pushing that shoulder back a little bit will help for that rifle. Now, if you're trying to develop a load that works across a wide variety of rifles, you're going to need to find out which one has the smallest chamber in it, and then set your die up to bump the shoulder for that rifle. But that's a little outside of this immediate discussion. So when you get to that point where you're having trouble locking the bolt down on neck-sized cartridges, you'll just go through and bump the shoulder back. You can do it with a full length sizing die, or you can do it with a body die. If you've gone through and you've actually neck-sized a bunch of brass and you're finding that when you chamber check it, you're having trouble locking that bolt down, you don't have to go through and full length size it. You can utilize a body die just to push that shoulder back a little bit, and that will leave the neck alone completely. So those are some options there. You definitely don't need to go through and do a full load workup if you are just going, if the only change you're making is going from neck size to full length sizing to get that brass right back down. I really haven't noticed any difference. In fact, any rifle that I've actually checked this in has shot to the exact same point of impact, no matter if I'm neck sizing or if I'm body sizing. Neck sizing, or if I'm bumping the shoulder back. In quite a few rifles, like the 6.5 Ma-10, all the ammo that goes through that rifle has the shoulder bumped back with a full-length sizing die as part of the loading process. None of that is neck-sized. And what I find with that rifle is I'm actually, with Hornady brass, the primer pockets are opening up before I'm having any cracking in the case neck or having any head separations in the cases. So very often you're going to run into a situation where you're actually going to have to throw the cases out before you get to that situation where the necks are cracking from the resizing. So just some things to keep in mind on that. I would say go ahead and neck size, bump the shoulder back when you need to, and roll with it. Our next question comes from Anthony, and Anthony asks, long-range hunting, where do you draw the line between ethical hunting or long-range live target practice? Seems nowadays everyone is trying to produce the best rifle cartridge to kill an animal at the furthest possible distance. Well, Anthony, first of all, I'm not really a big hunter, not because I have any moral restrictions to it or moral issues with it. I think that we've been hunters for a very, very long time. It's kind of part of our DNA. So I don't have any problems with hunting game animals at all, be it for sport, as long as the meat is actually used and the animal is not wasted. Then, hey, I'm cool with it. The only reason I don't do it right now is because I'm just very limited on the time that I have, and I don't really like some of the government restrictions put in place on hunting. But I won't go into my personal opinions on that. As far as long-range hunting, you have to remember that there are a couple of components going in here. Let's say that you are the absolute most awesome long-range shooter ever, and every single time you can read the wind, you can dope everything out perfectly, and you know the ballistics of your gun, so you're going to bang a target that would be the size of the vitals of an animal every time you want. Well, that's awesome, but that is really only one part of the equation. Remember, when you're hunting, you're shooting at a living animal. The living animal has its own motivations, its own ideas, and it's moving. So you may line up a perfect long-range shot that has several seconds worth of flight time. You may press the trigger with perfect sight alignment. The bullet heads on its way, what would be an absolute clean kill shot, and then all of a sudden something spooks that animal and it moves. And now that round that you were going to impact right in the boiler room hits its hindquarters, and now you've crippled an animal and it's in pain until you can climb down and get to wherever you need to go to get up to get to where the animal is and put it down. That's assuming that you couldn't take a follow-up shot from your position. So that's one of those things that you have to keep in mind. I think knowing the animals that you're hunting, knowing their patterns, knowing what they do is just as important as knowing your gun in that situation. So if you're able to sit here and you're able to observe an animal for a time being and know that, okay, it keeps reaching down, cropping some grass, standing up, looking around for this number of seconds, okay, now you've got a good idea when you need to send that cartridge, when that animal is going to be as still as possible for that round to actually impact. So there's a little bit more to it than just long-range target practice. If you have that skill and you're confident in that ability and you can make clean, ethical shots, I don't really have a problem with it. I do think once you get out to those extended ranges where you are getting really long flight times, now you put a lot of variables into the situation and you may end up where more shots than not are not clean shots. So it's going to be a personal decision. Like I said, I have no moral restrictions to long-range hunting. I have no moral restrictions to any kind of hunting, whether you do it with a spear, a bow, or whatever. As long as we can make that kill as clean as possible. I just don't want to see an animal suffer any more than necessary to end up on a plate. So just keep those things in mind. It's not always factors that you can control. Sometimes there are factors that are well outside of your control. And you know, there are a lot of hunters out there that even at 100 yards are not making clean shots. So I'm not going to go out there and say that, you know, a hunter shouldn't take a shot over 600 yards or shouldn't take a shot over 700 yards. Because if you're shooting with something that is still going to have enough energy to make a clean kill at that distance, then it's fully possible for you to be able to make an ethical and clean shot at that distance. The rifles that we shoot nowadays are very consistent. They're very accurate. So again, it's more about your ability as a hunter. And maybe if there's a question in the back of your mind on if you can make a clean kill or not, then, you know, even if it's the trophy animal of a lifetime, maybe it's your responsibility to hold your fire on that. Maybe stalk in a little bit closer, or maybe come back on a different day and try to find that animal again. That's just kind of my opinion, but again, I'm not that big of a hunter. I would really like to hear what you guys have to say about long-range hunting. Where do you think we start to hit the limits of an ethical shot? And do you think we should be hunting animals at long range at all anyway? Please go ahead and leave your comments down in the comments section below, but please keep it polite and keep it reasonable. Our next question comes from Chris, and Chris asks, what issues come from putting a stainless barrel on a blued action? Will accuracy be affected? Electrolysis? Also, picked up a McMillan stock in '94 after getting out of service. How can I tell which model it is for a Remington 700 long action? Well, Chris, your question is kind of interesting. First of all, it is pretty common practice to put a stainless barrel on a chrome moly or a blued action. We've done that for quite some time. I have quite a few rifles in the safe right now that are stainless barrels that are put on a blued action. Now, the one in front of me obviously is a stainless barrel on an aluminum action, but we still have dissimilar metals going on here. Now, electrolysis isn't really the correct term, I think, for what you have in mind. The corrosion between dissimilar metals is galvanic corrosion. And what you really need to be able to cause this corrosion is you need an electrolyte between it. You need some kind of fluid to be able to allow for that corrosion to occur. And usually when we screw barrels into a receiver, we're utilizing either some kind of anti-seize or some kind of grease screwing them together. Now, if you do store your barrels in a aquarium, you know, you got a saltwater aquarium and you're dropping your rifles in there after you're done shooting, then you really might have to worry about galvanic corrosion, because the salt water is allowing the dissimilar metals to pass electrons back and forth, and that's what causes the corrosion. We have to worry about galvanic corrosion in boats, because not only do we have batteries hooked to engines in boats and hooked to wiring in boats, but everything is also submerged under the water. Again, that's getting a little bit outside of what we're talking about here, but I can tell you that in my experience, I've never seen any problems with putting a stainless barrel on to a dissimilar action, either a carbon steel or chrome moly, or there are quite a few different grades of steel that they use for actions out there. I haven't seen any issues with it. I haven't even heard of any issues with it. More issues that we have are when rifles are mistreated and they rust together, or you run into something like a Remington factory barrel that they seemingly like to glue into the receiver, and it takes a gorilla and a 20-pound hammer to be able to break the action and the barrel apart, but not so much galvanic corrosion, so I wouldn't really worry about that at all. Now, your question about your Remington 700 McMillan stock, one of the best ways, or probably the quickest ways to figure out what stock you have, is just go on McMillan's website and look at the different tactical and the different hunting style stocks they have and see which one yours looks most like. If you're not able to figure it out that way, then I would just go ahead and shoot a picture and send it to McMillan customer service, and they will probably be able to tell you pretty quickly. Remember, there are guys that are still working at the company there that have worked at the company since the absolute beginning, so I'm sure that they can pass that around and figure out, even if it's not one of their current production stocks, they can probably figure out what it was and get you some information on it. I found that McMillan customer service tends to be very, very good. So that would be my recommendation. If you're not able to find it on the website, just shoot McMillan a photograph of it and see if they can figure it out. And worst comes to worst, just post up a picture on our 8541 Tactical Shooters group on Facebook, and I'm sure someone out there can figure it out. I can take a look at it, and we can see if we can figure out what kind of stock you have. And our next question comes from a different Chris, and Chris says, "Hey John, love the show. I'm just moving into precision rifle and prefer to reload my own bullets. Half the price means double the shooting. What's the best way to make a load that will be reasonably accurate when my skill as a shooter are still questionable?" Well, Chris, that's kind of a tough one, because you need to be able to shoot the rifle in a fairly accurate method to be able to determine if the load that you've made is an accurate load. So if you're not able to shoot accurately with factory ammo to begin with, it's very difficult for you to be able to verify that the load that you've worked up is an accurate load. Now, there are kind of some ways around this. First of all, obviously, you can get a buddy that is an accurate rifle shooter to help you out. Or you can use a method to kind of back into an appropriate powder charge that really doesn't require any accuracy at all. And the method I'm talking about is shooting your loads over a chronograph. Now, assuming that you're starting from absolute zero, you have no idea what kind of ammunition or what kind of bullet or powder to use, you're first going to have to do some research, go on the web, look up what precision rifle shooters are using in the caliber that you are loading for. You didn't mention what cartridge you're utilizing, so I'm not going to speculate, because that could run you into some problems. But go look that cartridge up online, look on the various different forums, and find out what the most popular bullet and powder is. Now, once you've settled on a bullet and powder, go grab your reloading manual, look up that bullet and powder for your cartridge in the reloading manual, and it will tell you the minimum and maximum load for that bullet and that powder. Now what you'll need to do is you'll need to utilize the information in the reloading manual. You'll need to load up some test cartridges starting at the minimum, and I would go about half grain increments. If we're talking about a Magnum cartridge, you can go larger than that, but half grain increments are usually pretty good for the first run of this. And start from the minimum and run up to the maximum, and very often I will go a couple of steps beyond the maximum. I'll allow you to determine how comfortable you are with that. And say, for instance, the starting charge is 41.5. Well, my first charge weight would be 41.5. My next would be 42. My next would be 42.5, then 43, 43.5, etc. until I got to that maximum or a couple steps beyond that. Now you're going to take all that ammo, you're going to go to the range, you're going to set up a chronograph. So you'll either need to purchase one or you'll need to borrow one. I would just recommend purchasing one because it's something that throughout precision rifle shooting, and especially if you're planning on reloading, that you will use over and over and over again. Something like the MagnetoSpeed chronograph that we have reviewed before is great for this because it doesn't require any accuracy at all. It just requires that you set it up properly on the barrel, and then you don't have to worry about accidentally shooting it. So for this, you don't even need a scope on your rifle to be able to actually do this. So you set your chronograph up, and then you fire your cartridges across your chronograph, and you log in the velocity that you get for each charge weight. You start at the lowest, and you go up to the highest, and log each one of those velocities. Now, when you get back from the range, you'll plug those in either to Excel or another graphing application, or just grab you some graph paper and draw out a line graph on it. And you will graph where each one of those cartridges hit for the velocity versus the charge weight, and then draw you a nice line graph connecting the dots. And what you should see is the rounds will, or the velocity will trend up from the lowest to the highest charge weight, but it will kind of be a wavy line. So you'll see it go up, and then you'll see it kind of level off a little bit, and then go up a little bit and level off a little bit. It may not be perfectly level, but it will be less of a slant than the previous or the later charge weights. When you see those steps in that line graph, those are your accuracy nodes. That's where different charge weights are grouping together. Now, if you actually shot these accurately at longer distances, then the effect that you would see on the target is they would start to come up, and then the shots would get closer together at one point, and then they would come back further apart, and then closer together, and then further apart. So those ones that are on those steps are going to group close together, which is the whole purpose of finding an accuracy node. So you'll want to pick a charge weight that lies in the middle of one of those, and that should theoretically be your best longer range cartridge. Now, it may not be the most accurate at a closer range, but what it is it's the most resistant to change. So if you get a slight difference in pressure in your chamber based on either temperature or an overthrow or an underthrow of powder, then those cartridges should group fairly close together at longer range. So this is really what we're looking at in a precision rifle long range cartridge. After that, there are a whole bunch of other fine-tuning methods that you can use by setting the seating depth of your cartridge and all this other stuff, but that really requires the ability to shoot accurate tight groups to verify this, whereas the chronograph version to get your powder charge doesn't, and that should leave you with some very accurate ammunition. Now, of course, you'll still need to go out and you'll still need to shoot on a target accurately to verify this, and that, again, may be where a friend who can shoot your rifle to a high degree of accuracy may come in. And if at some point you're shooting your ammunition and you determine, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem like it's shooting well, it may be a good idea to have some factory match ammunition on hand that you can throw through your rifle and see how it compares to your hand-loaded ammunition, just to give you a good idea. So if you think that there's a problem and your hand-loaded ammunition isn't grouping well, and then the factory ammunition groups a smaller size, well, it's probably time to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the problem is. Now, really, for precision rifle shooters that are starting out, that don't have a mastery of the fundamentals yet, what I would really tell you is take that time and that effort that you would spend on rolling up your own ammunition and utilize that in dry firing your rifle. Dry firing is going to give you the most improvement for the least amount of effort and the least amount of money. Then in that dry firing, break that up and figure the dry firing is the practice, live firing is the test to see if you've been practicing well. So for that, I would say go ahead and use factory match ammunition. You are correct that you would be able to shoot more utilizing hand-loaded ammunition. But what you're going to have to also fight then is you're going to have to fight the mental game. When you start seeing problems, you're going to immediately start questioning if it's your ammo that you loaded that's causing the problem, especially if you're not a very experienced reloader, versus if you're shooting factory ammunition, then the factory ammunition probably is not the problem. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind if you're going to actually try this. My recommendation again would be not to load your own ammunition at this point. It would do a lot of dry firing and shoot a little bit of factory ammunition to perfect it. But if you really want to go ahead and you want to reload, then give the chronograph method a try. If you don't have the ability to purchase your own chronograph at this point, you can probably find somebody that can loan you one or go out to the range and shoot over theirs for a little bit, because it really is only going to take a handful of cartridges to do this test and figure out where the charge weight is that you need to be at. So I hope that helps you out. Hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. And if you have any questions on it, please go ahead and post down in the comments down below. And our last question today comes from Joshua. And Joshua asks, I've been thinking about having my rifle threaded for a muzzle brake. In your experience, are there any major disadvantages to running a brake on a precision bolt gun? The rifle's chambered in .308 Winchester. Well, Joshua, the major disadvantage is you're not going to make any friends to the left and the right of you. That is the biggest disadvantage of a brake, is diverting that muzzle blast instead of going straight down range, which again translates into recoil back into you, that whole Newton's law thing. You're diverting that blast to the side, so you're mitigating the amount of force that is being used to push the rifle right back into your shoulder. So the blast going out to your sides also can be reflected by things to the left and the right of you. So if at your range you have concrete shooting benches like mine does, and you're shooting on the ground between the benches, those benches act as reflectors, and if you're not able to get your muzzle far enough forward of the benches, they reflect the concussion directly back into you, and it can make for a little bit of an unnerving shooting day. Very often I have to double up ear pro so that concussion is not rattling me and I don't come off the range feeling like I've been shelled for a half an hour. That's the biggest drawback. The flip side of that is there are a lot of advantages to having a muzzle brake on the end of your rifle. Not to mention just the recoil reduction. You also now have a degree of protection on the front of your rifle. If you're running barricades or you're climbing rocks or going in and out of obstacles, if you slip, and it does happen from time to time, and you slam that muzzle into something, then that brake will offer you a degree of protection. Now, it's not foolproof, because if you hit something hard enough to bend one of the baffles in the brake, you can still run into problems. Or if you really tear up the end of the brake, then that can cause very similar issues to what you would have if you tear up the crown on your rifle. The advantage there is it's much easier to fix a brake or remove a brake and discard it and replace it than it is to recrown the rifle. Recrowning the rifle usually takes a little bit of skill, and just replacing the brake is something that usually only takes a wrench. So it does give you a little bit of protection there. Again, another drawback is it adds a little bit of length to the overall length of your rifle. This usually is not a problem with competition rifles, unless for some reason you're shooting some rifle competition that requires a minimum overall or a maximum overall length. I'm not really aware of any PRS style competitions that have any dimensional requirements on the rifle, but it's something to keep in mind if you're just ticking off those pros and cons. Most of my competition rifles have brakes on them. There are only a few that I run suppressors on, And I only have one right now that has a plain muzzle on it, and it was not because that was my choice. It was because I needed a barrel now, and the only thing I could get for that rifle had a plain muzzle, and I could not wait to have it threaded. It still has not been threaded because it is a short life cartridge. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense once I'm 600-700 rounds into that barrel to take it back off, send it out, and have it threaded when I may only get another 1,000 to 1,200 rounds out of it before the barrel's trash. Just doesn't make sense to spend that money on it. Everything else pretty much has brakes on it. If it is a rifle that I had built specifically for competition, it gets a brake. So that's just my opinion. I think you'll find that most competitors are of the same mind. Most are running either suppressors or brakes. Brakes are the less expensive, easier option, and brakes actually are greater. They have a greater reduction of recoil than suppressors through most of my experience. And that's going to do it for this Mail Call Mondays. But before we go, I know you guys want to know about this guy in front of us, so I'll take a real quick minute and talk about it. This is our 1022 project that we've been working with for a while. The last time you guys saw it, it did have a Victor Company Titan 1022 stock on it. Now it wears a McMillan A522, and it is not because there was anything wrong with the Titan 1022. That is a great stock, and it works very well in its price point. This is in a totally different price point. This stock can go from about $400 well up into $1,000 depending upon what options you get on it. The A522 that we have sitting here in front of us has quite a few options built into it, to include the thumb wheel adjustable cheek piece. It has a spacer system set up into it. It has flush cups on the left and the right side of it, so I can switch my sling to whichever side. And it does have a rail underneath, so we can clip our bipod on here. It is inletted for the regular Ruger 1022 action. If you have a kid action with a tang on the back, then you can also get this inletted for the kid action. It does have an aluminum stud in it, or I'm sorry, an aluminum pillar in it. So the action screw does go through the aluminum pillar, and it has a steel bushing that the screw goes through, so you're not worried about wearing anything out by tightening that screw down. Now, one interesting thing that I did find out about the A522 when we dropped our action in here is that it is not free-floated. The barrel is actually resting in the forend on a pad here, so the barrel is fully supported. We have seen this on other stocks like the Bell & Carlson stock that we tried out, and you have to be careful because that can give you some issues overall depending upon how you load the bipod. We actually did a little bit of a talk previously about our experience loading the bipod with a free float and loading it with a pressure pad. Now, the stock that I have in front of me, the A522, is an extremely, extremely rigid stock. We are not done with all of our testing for the review yet, but I will tell you that I have loaded this thing with a lot of force and seen a very minimal shift in impact because of the pressure pad. And I've really loaded it with a lot more force that I'm actually going to use out in the field. And I don't know if there's any way to totally overcome that, because you do have a lever down here and you are working on a long forend here where the mounting point is back here. So you are going to have a slight change here when you're putting 100+ pounds of force against the back of the rifle. But this stock is very stiff. I really can't perceive any flex at all in it. But one of the really biggest draws of this stock to me over something like the Victor Company Titan 1022 is that this feels exactly like a McMillan A5 that you would have on a full-size bolt-action rifle. The forend feels the same, the pistol grip feels the same, the cheek, it all feels exactly the same. So if you have a bolt-action rifle that you use for competition with a McMillan A5 on it, then the A522 is a really good option for 1022 because it will feel the same. You'll mount it up the same. You can ideally put exactly the same setup and accessories on it that you would put your full-size match rifle on. So if you're one of these guys that shoots NRL or PRS and you want to shoot NRL 22, it is a great option. A lot of people will complain about the cost, but realistically, it's a competition rifle. You look at the prices of competition rifles out there. Let's forget that this is a rimfire. Let's just remember that this is a competition rifle in a different caliber. And then things like expensive stocks, expensive optics, expensive accessories kind of don't seem as strange anymore. I mean, most people would say if you're putting a very expensive stock on a 22, look at you like you're nuts. But if you tell them you're putting a very expensive stock on a top-end open-class competition rifle, they don't look at you like you're so nuts anymore. So that's just my opinion right now. So far, I have a grand total of 1 range day with this setup, and I will tell you right off the bat that I really, really like it. It's very enjoyable, very high-quality stock, as most McMillans are. Now, we've gotten a lot of questions on what the colorway is when we posted this up on Instagram and on Facebook. This is the Urban Carbon Ambush pattern. And it is very, very nice. It's very difficult to pick up on camera exactly how detailed this pattern is. The urban camouflage pattern is kind of cool. I went with it because this is not going to be a field rifle. This is a competition rifle used on a square range. So really, any colorway would be fine on it. But I thought since we're running a silver barrel and black action, that the urban camouflage pattern looked kind of cool. What I didn't realize when we ordered this camouflage pattern is that the base gel coat is kind of translucent. It kind of has a smoky look to it, and you can see the carbon fiber weave inside the stock. And it is really, really interesting when you look at it up close. I'm a sucker for carbon fiber from my days putting parts on sport compact cars and motorcycles and that. I love the way that raw carbon fiber looks, and to be able to look through the pattern and see the weave inside the stock just looks really cool. So my opinion is this is an amazing looking stock. It's super high quality, as all McMillans were. The action dropped into here and tightened down just fine. There's no wiggle at the rear of the action, which is one of the things that concerns me with the way 1022 stocks mount in. It's snugged down in there just perfectly, and we are seeing very comparable accuracy with the A522 versus the Victor Company Titan 1022. Now that may seem strange at first because they are vastly different price points, but as we've discussed before with centerfire rifle chassis, a stock or a chassis system can only allow the action to perform to its peak. Once you've reached the peak that the action is capable of, then no improvement on the stock or chassis is going to increase that accuracy. So once you've reached that peak, you've reached that peak. You can't really go above it no matter how much money you drop into it. So that is my current opinion on the McMillan A522, and I definitely want to thank McMillan for sending this stock out to us. It is really, really nice overall. Very good feeling stock, and as I mentioned before, a top-end fiberglass stock has its own feel versus chassis systems. It's a different feel, and it's a whole lot of personal preference on if you prefer chassis systems or if you prefer classic stocks. I will say that this thing feels a lot more solid than a polymer stock like the Titan 1022, but again, you pay for that difference. So it's up to you on if you believe that the difference warrants the price point. If you guys have any questions on anything that we've covered in today's show, to include the McMillan A522, leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the show, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast, make sure you send questions to us at 8541tactical@gmail.com. And until next time, get out and shoot.